In the frozen skies over Nazi Germany, a reckless B-17 tail gunner from South Boston rewrites the rules of aerial combat, turning the bomber's most vulnerable position into its deadliest weapon and saving thousands of lives in the process. The English fog was a cold, wet shroud that clung to everything at Station 153. It seeped into the Nissen huts, dampened the spirits of the ground crews, and delayed the missions of the 390th Bombardment Group. For the airmen of the U.S. 8th Air Force, the fog was a tangible representation of the uncertainty that clouded their every waking moment. The air war over Germany was a brutal, unforgiving meat grinder. In the winter of 1943-44, the odds of completing a 25-mission tour were grimly slim. For every 100 men who flew, more than half would be killed, wounded, or captured. Nowhere were those odds longer than in the tailgun position of a Boeing B-17 flying fortress. It was a lonely, isolated world of plexiglass and aluminum, tacked onto the ass end of a 10-man, 10-ton war machine. The position was so notoriously dangerous it had earned a litany of dark nicknames: the coffin corner, tail end Charlie, the suicide seat. From this cramped perch, a man knelt for hours on a modified bicycle seat, battling temperatures that plunged to 60 below zero and the constant threat of frostbite. He was the bomber's sole rear guard, his eyes scanning the vast, empty sky for the specks that would resolve into the deadliest threat in the European theater of operations: the fighters of the German Luftwaffe. The standard doctrine for dealing with this threat was simple, logical, and tragically flawed. It was a doctrine of defense. Gunners were trained to wait, to conserve ammunition, to fire only when a fighter committed to its attack run and entered the optimal firing range. They were taught to be reactive, to weather the storm, and protect the aircraft. It was a philosophy born of necessity and caution, and it was getting them killed in staggering numbers. A tail gunner had a 38% chance of not finishing his tour, a statistic that haunted the mess halls and barracks of every bomber base in England. Into this world of grim statistics and defensive doctrine walked Staff Sergeant Michael "Mad Mike" Donovan. Donovan was not a product of military academies or tactical symposiums. He was a product of South Boston, a crucible of concrete and brick, where survival was a lesson learned with bruised knuckles and a bloody nose. His father was a dock worker, with hands like leather mallets. His older brother, a Golden Gloves boxer who taught him the brutal arithmetic of a street fight. Mike learned early, and he learned well. Waiting gets you hurt. Hesitation is a prelude to pain. Action, immediate and overwhelming, is what keeps you breathing. By the time he was 17, he'd been in 32 street fights. He'd won 28 and lost 4. The 4 he lost, he'd later reflect, were because he'd started too late. When the news of Pearl Harbor crackled over the radio, Donovan didn't wait for a draft notice. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces the next day. The recruiters saw his brawny frame and pegged him for a ground crew mechanic. Donovan saw the posters of the B-17s bristling with .50 caliber machine guns and insisted on gunnery school. His instructors found him to be a problematic student. He was too aggressive, they wrote in his file, too reckless, too willing to expose himself to theoretical return fire in the training simulations. His ammunition expenditure was consistently double that of his peers. During one review, his exasperated instructor, a buttoned-down lieutenant from Ohio, confronted him. "Sergeant, your job is to defend the aircraft, not win the war single-handedly. You're wasting ammunition." Donovan's reply became the stuff of legend at the school. "Dead gunners don't shoot back, sir. Live ones do." He didn't graduate at the top of his class in marksmanship. He finished 3rd. His true talent wasn't in hitting a static target. It was in speed. Donovan could acquire and track targets faster than any trainee the instructors had ever seen. His secret was the same philosophy he'd honed in the back alleys of Boston. He didn't wait for the enemy to enter his designated firing zone. He went hunting for them before they even got there. In late February 1944, a transfer order sent Donovan to the 390th Bombardment Group at Framlingham. He was assigned to a B-17G, serial number 42-31043, a battle-scarred veteran aircraft christened Hell's Fury. The plane and its crew had a reputation. They had flown 3 harrowing missions, twice suffering near-catastrophic encounters with swarms of German fighters. Their previous tail gunner, a sergeant named Eddie Morrison, had survived both encounters but had seen enough. Shaken and trembling, he had requested an immediate transfer to a ground position. "That position's cursed," Morrison had told the crew chief. "Next man who sits back there dies." Buitoist. Donovan volunteered for the position before the ink on Morrison's transfer was dry. The pilot of Hell's Fury, Captain James Whitmore, was a calm, steady hand from rural Pennsylvania. He was 24 but looked 30, the weight of command aging him in dog years. He interviewed every new replacement for his crew personally. He sat Donovan down in the briefing room, a file open on the table between them. "You know the statistics for this position, Sergeant?" Whitmore asked, his voice even. "Yes, sir. 38% casualty rate, highest on the plane." "Means I've got 62% odds of making it, sir," Donovan replied, without a flicker of hesitation. "I'll take 'em." Whitmore studied the young sergeant. He saw no fear in Donovan's eyes, only a disconcerting intensity, a coiled energy that seemed barely contained. "Why this position? You could have waited for a waist gunner slot." "Because I don't intend to wait for them to shoot me, Captain," Donovan said. "I intend to shoot first." A long silence filled the room. Whitmore closed the file. He'd seen all kinds of men come through his command: the scared, the brave, the fatalistic, the foolish. Donovan was something else entirely. "You're insane, Donovan," Whitmore said, a slow smile breaking across his tired face. "You'll fit right in." Donovan's first mission with the crew of Hell's Fury was on March 2, 1944. The target was a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt, a name that sent a chill down the spine of any 8th Air Force veteran. The previous raids on Schweinfurt had been disasters, resulting in devastating losses. As the formation crossed into German airspace, the air crackled with tension. The disembodied voices on the intercom were tight, clipped. Every man was a tightly wound spring. Donovan, however, felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Kneeling in his turret, the twin Browning Mi-250 calibers felt like extensions of his own arms. This was his world now, a 4-foot bubble of plexiglass suspended 4 miles above a hostile continent. The call came from the top turret gunner. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high. Bandits coming in." Donovan swiveled his turret. He saw them, a quartet of Messerschmitt Bf-109s, diving out of the sun. Standard procedure dictated he wait. Wait until they committed to their attack run. Wait until the lead plane was within 600 yards to ensure a high-probability kill. Donovan had other plans. He thumbed his microphone switch. "Tail to crew, engaging." The lead German fighter was still over 1,000 yards out, a mere speck. Donovan didn't care. He squeezed the triggers, unleashing a long, chattering burst of 50 caliber rounds. The tracers, glowing red snakes, clawed through the empty sky, missing the lead fighter by 100 feet. "Donovan, what the hell are you doing? Conserve your ammo!" Whitmore's voice barked over the intercom. But Donovan's burst had had its intended effect. The German pilots, not expecting defensive fire at such an extreme range, were momentarily stunned. The lead pilot instinctively broke hard to the left, his wingmen scattering in his wake. Their perfectly coordinated attack run was ruined before it had even begun. One of the wingmen, slower to react, flew through the tail end of Donovan's tracer stream. A flicker of smoke blossomed from its engine. The pilot, unnerved, peeled away and dove for the cloud cover below. The remaining fighters regrouped, but their aggression was gone. They shadowed the bomber formation from a safe distance, probing for an opening that never came. On that mission, Donovan officially shot down one BF-109 and was credited with damaging 2 more. But it wasn't his kill count that had the crew buzzing during debrief. It was his method. The crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Frank Murphy, cornered Donovan by the hard stand as the ground crew patched up the flak holes in hell's fury. "I checked your ammo count, kid," Murphy said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "You fired 900 rounds. 900! The book says short, controlled bursts." "The book also says we're supposed to let them shoot first," Donovan retorted, lighting a cigarette. "How's that working out for everyone else? We didn't take a single round from a fighter today, Murph. I'll make that trade every time." Murphy grumbled, but couldn't argue with the logic. The plane was intact, and the crew was alive. Donovan's second mission, 2 days later on March 4th, was to another factory target. This time the Luftwaffe was more prepared. A flight of 6 Focke-Wulf FW-190s, the feared butcher birds, rose to meet them. They approached from the classic 6 o'clock high position, the lead fighter drawing the attention of the bomber's defenses. Donovan had been thinking. He'd studied the German tactics in the base library, poring over after-action reports. The American response was predictable. Everyone targeted the lead attacker. It was a fatal flaw in the defensive doctrine. As the FW-190s began their diving attack, Donovan ignored the lead fighter completely. Instead, he swung his sights onto the second plane in the formation. The wingman. The pilot who wasn't expecting return fire yet. The pilot who was concentrating on flying a predictable pattern to maintain formation with his leader. Donovan's burst was precise and brutal. The 50 caliber rounds ripped into the FW-190's wing root. The wing sheared off, and the fighter cartwheeled through the sky before exploding in a greasy black fireball. The lead pilot, suddenly and violently alone, broke off his attack immediately. The entire German formation, their cohesion shattered, disengaged. After they landed, Murphy met him again, shaking his head in disbelief. "You fired 1,600 rounds this time. You used 80% of your ammo on one attack. And we didn't get hit," Donovan said, his voice flat. "I'll take that trade every single day." But Donovan wasn't satisfied. He hadn't just prevented attacks or disrupted formations. He had seized control of the engagement. He had dictated the terms of the fight. That night, lying on his bunk in the damp chill of the Nissen hut, he had an epiphany. The American gunners were always reacting. The Germans were always acting. The initiative, the fundamental advantage in any conflict, belonged to the attacker. Every defensive doctrine ever written was based on the assumption that the enemy controlled the timing and tempo of the battle. What if you reversed it? What if you attacked the attackers? What if you forced the enemy to defend themselves before they even had a chance to begin their attack? What if you turned the most dangerous defensive position on a B-17 into the most feared offensive weapon in the sky? The air in the briefing hut was thick with the smell of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and nervous sweat. The mission for the day was a deep penetration raid on an aircraft factory in Augsburg, Germany. Intelligence predicted the fiercest resistance yet. The Luftwaffe would throw everything they had at the bomber stream. Losses were expected to be heavy. Whitmore gathered his crew around the belly of Hell's Fury for a final talk before takeoff. "This one's going to be rough," he said, his voice low and serious. "Stay sharp. Watch each other's backs. Stay alive." Donovan raised his hand. "Permission to try something different, sir." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Like what, Donovan?" "Aggressive fire, sir. From the start. I want to engage the fighters before they can even form up for their attack runs. I want to force them to defend before they can attack." Whitmore frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "That will burn through your ammunition like nothing else. You'll be dry before we even get to the target." "Or," Donovan countered, "I'll prevent the real fight from ever happening." "Sir, with all due respect, we've been playing defense for 2 years. How's that working out? 38% casualty rate from my position. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot." The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The idea was radical, reckless. But they had also seen the results of Donovan's methods on the last 2 missions. They had come home without a scratch from enemy fighters. Whitmore weighed his options. His gut told him it was suicide. His experience told him that the standard methods were also a form of slow suicide. He looked at Donovan, at the unshakable certainty in the young sergeant's eyes. "You've got 1 mission to prove it, Donovan," the pilot said finally. 1. If we get shredded up there because your guns are empty when we need them, you're off this crew. Deal?" "Deal." They took off at 0647 hours, climbing into the pre-dawn gloom. They formed up with the rest of the 390th over the North Sea and climbed to their bombing altitude of 23,000 feet. The routine of the flight was a comfort. The drone of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines, the crackle of the intercom, the slow crawl across the English Channel. They crossed into German airspace at 0824 hours. The call came at 0919. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high, a whole mess of them. Looks like 12 bandits." Donovan swiveled his twin 50s. He saw them. 12 BF-109s, 2,000 yards out, maneuvering into a classic pincer formation, preparing for a coordinated, multi-axis attack. The textbook response was to wait. Wait until they were committed, then engage the lead fighter. Donovan did neither. He opened fire immediately. At 2,000 yards, it was a ridiculously long shot, a gesture of pure defiance. The tracers arced through the thin, cold air, most of them missing by hundreds of feet. But the psychological effect was immediate and profound. The German formation, caught completely off guard by this insane display of aggression from a lone tail gunner, scattered. Their lead pilot, a veteran with over 50 missions, instinctively broke hard right. His wingmen, their attack pattern shattered, hesitated. The entire, carefully planned assault disintegrated before it could even begin. "Donovan, cease fire! You're wasting ammunition!" Whitmore's voice crackled with anger over the intercom. "Negative, sir," Donovan replied calmly. "Watch what happens next." The German fighters attempted to regroup, but their approach was different now. It was no longer the confident, aggressive dive of a predator. It was cautious, hesitant. They probed the bombers' defenses, unsure of what they were facing. The initiative had shifted. Donovan tracked the new lead fighter. He let them close to 1,500 yards, then fired again. Not a long, wasteful burst, but a series of short, controlled volleys. He wasn't aiming to hit the fighter. He was aiming to intimidate the pilot. It worked. The formation broke again. But one BF-109, the wingman on the far left, held its course. This was a different kind of pilot. An expertise, a veteran ace who wouldn't be so easily scared off. Donovan recognized the type. This one would require a different tactic. He would have to be killed. Donovan let the fighter close. 1,400 yards, 1,300, 1,200. The range where most gunners would be pouring out sustained fire. Donovan held his. The German pilot, emboldened, pressed his attack. 100 yards. 1,000. The BF-109 now filled his gun sight. Now! Donovan fired. Not a burst, but a sustained 3-second barrage of pure, concentrated violence. 200 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition slammed into the front of the German fighter. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. The pilot tried to brake, but he flew directly into the solid stream of tracers. The engine exploded. The propeller sheared off. The entire aircraft disintegrated into a shower of flaming debris that tumbled towards the earth 4 miles below. "Good kill, Mike! Good kill!" the radio operator shouted over the intercom. "Donovan just splashed one!" But Donovan wasn't celebrating. He was already scanning, tracking, hunting. The remaining 11 fighters had regrouped. They knew now. They knew this tail position was not a soft target. It was a death trap. They would adjust their tactics. They would come from different angles, split his attention, try to overwhelm him. Donovan expected this. He had planned for it. The fighters split into 2 groups. 6 attacked from directly astern at 6 o'clock. 5 more came in from the 7 o'clock position. The waist gunners, Sergeants Tommy Price and Carl Johnson, would have to handle the 7 o'clock threat. Donovan ignored them completely, focusing everything he had on the 6 fighters diving straight for his tail. He picked the lead aircraft, fired, hit. The fighter exploded. He immediately shifted his sights to the new leader, fired. Another hit. The second fighter's canopy blew off, and it fell away in an uncontrolled spin. In less than 30 seconds, 3 more BF-109s fell from the sky. The remaining fighters broke off completely. This was not a tactical repositioning. This was a full-scale retreat. They were fleeing from a single American tail gunner. The formation flew on. Donovan reloaded his guns, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He checked his ammunition count. He had expended 1,200 rounds. 800 remained. Enough for 1 more sustained engagement. 15 minutes later, the Germans returned. This time there were 18 of them, a full staffel. They had learned from the first encounter. They attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously: 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. It was a textbook, overwhelming assault designed to divide a bomber's defensive fire and guarantee a kill. Donovan made a split-second decision. He chose violence. He ignored the attackers at the 4 and 5 o'clock positions, trusting the waist and ball turret gunners to handle them. He focused everything on the 6 fighters making a direct stern attack. The closing speed between the bomber and the fighters was over 400 knots. That gave him exactly 7 seconds before the Germans were in their own firing range. Donovan used all 7. He walked his tracers directly into the lead fighter's flight path. The German pilot couldn't evade without breaking off his attack. He held his course, a fatal mistake. At 800 yards, Donovan's rounds found their mark. The fighter's canopy shattered, and the plane rolled over and fell away. 5 remaining. 3 seconds to impact. Donovan shifted to the next fighter. There was no time to track, no time to aim properly. It was pure instinct. He fired not at where the target was, but at where physics dictated it would be in 2 seconds. The second BF-109 flew directly into the stream of bullets. Its engine exploded in a brilliant orange and black fireball. The 3 remaining fighters broke off immediately, fleeing for their lives. "Jesus Christ," Whitmore's voice whispered over the intercom, a tone of pure awe in his voice. Donovan just splashed 2 more in 3 seconds. But Donovan wasn't celebrating. He was reloading his last ammunition belt, 400 rounds remaining, and they still hadn't reached the target. As they neared Augsburg, the sky filled with enemy aircraft. A full group of 36 fighters, a mix of BF-109s and the heavily armed FW-190s, rose to meet them. Combined with the remnants of the previous waves, Hell's Fury was now facing a swarm of nearly 50 enemy fighters. To make matters worse, during the earlier engagements, they had drifted from the main bomber formation. The nearest friendly B-17 was 3 miles away. Their P-51 Mustang escorts were nowhere in sight. They were alone. Donovan had 380 rounds left. The math was impossible, unless he changed the equation. "Captain," Donovan's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "Permission to try something." What now, Donovan? Attack! There was a moment of stunned silence from the cockpit. Then Whitmore's voice, carefully controlled. Explain. Those fighters are still forming up for a coordinated assault, sir. If we give them 2 more minutes, they'll hit us from every angle at once. We can't defend against that, but we can disrupt it. If I engage them now, while they're still organizing, I can force them to scatter before they're ready. You'll be out of ammunition in 30 seconds, Mike. Then I'd better make every one of them count, sir, Donovan replied. Defensive tactics won't work when you're outnumbered 50-1. Our only chance is to hit them hard while they're still vulnerable. Whitmore took 3 seconds to process the insane logic of the plan. It was a suicidal gamble. But Donovan was right. Their only alternative was certain death. Do it, Whitmore said. If you get us all killed, I'm writing your family a very angry letter. The German formation was 2,000 yards out, a hornet's nest of lethal intent, still organizing itself for the kill. Donovan didn't waste a second. He opened fire. Not short, controlled bursts, not suppressive fire. He unleashed a maximum sustained barrage, pouring 200 rounds directly into the chaotic center of the enemy formation in 8 seconds. He wasn't targeting individual aircraft. He was targeting their coordination. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The stream of tracers tore through the heart of the formation. One Bf-109 caught fire and spiraled down. 2 others collided while trying to evade the unexpected onslaught. The entire German formation, all 48 fighters, disintegrated into chaos. What had been a disciplined, deadly strike force was now just a collection of individual aircraft, each pilot scrambling to survive. Holy... Whitmore didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The entire crew had witnessed it. One lone tail gunner with a single suicidal burst of defiance had just broken up the largest fighter assault any of them had ever seen. The Germans, furious and disorganized, regrouped in 90 seconds. They swarmed, a dozen fighters diving from 6 o'clock simultaneously. No formation, no strategy, just overwhelming, brute force violence. Donovan, his ammunition dwindling, picked his targets with cold precision. He fired 30-round bursts into 3 consecutive aircraft. All 3 took hits. 1 exploded. 2 broke off, trailing smoke. The remaining 9 pressed their attack, their cannons lighting up the sky. 20-millimeter rounds ripped past Hell's Fury's tail. Metal shrieked as several rounds found their mark. The aircraft shuddered violently, but Donovan kept firing. Target, burst, target, burst. Another Bf-109 fell, then another. At 100 yards, point-blank range, the 3 remaining attackers broke off. The risk of collision now outweighed the chance of a kill. Donovan tracked one last fighter, squeezing the trigger. Click, click, click. The guns were silent. They were dry. "I'm out," Donovan yelled over the intercom. "Guns are dry." The remaining German fighters knew it. They regrouped one final time, 27 of them. They had lost 21 of their comrades to this one. Single bomber. They had the advantage now. The tail position was neutralized. They formed up for a final deliberate execution run from directly astern. Donovan watched them approach. 400 yards, 300, 200. He had no ammunition. He had no way to defend his crew. But he had one weapon left: psychology. He swiveled his silent guns, tracking the lead German fighter with perfect mechanical precision. He followed its every move, keeping the barrels of his twin 50s aligned perfectly with the pilot's cockpit, as if his weapons were fully loaded and ready to fire. The German pilot, a young Oberleutnant from Bavaria, saw the twin guns tracking him. He knew, intellectually, that the American was likely out of ammunition after the previous engagements. But instinct, drilled into him through hundreds of hours of combat training, screamed louder than logic. When a gun is aimed at you, you evade. He broke formation. making an immediate, hard right turn. The rest of the German formation, seeing their leader break, followed suit. They broke their attack pattern, not because Donovan could shoot them, but because they believed he could. The phantom threat of his previous kills was more powerful than the reality of his empty guns. Reputation alone had become a weapon. The German formation scattered and did not return. The cost of engaging this one insane bomber was simply too high. Hell's Fury landed at Framlingham at 16:47 hours, 9 hours after it had taken off. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. The bomber was riddled with 47 bullet holes and 13 cannon strikes. But it had survived. The crew chief, Murphy, found Donovan sitting on the tarmac, calmly smoking a cigarette. "You used everything," Murphy said, his voice hushed. 2,000 rounds. You fired every damn bullet we loaded." "Had to," Donovan replied, taking a long drag. "Didn't have enough to waste any." The official debriefing was a sensation. Based on reports from other crew members, visual confirmations from the P-51s that had finally arrived, and intercepted German radio chatter, the intelligence officers made their astonishing calculation. In 4 minutes of sustained combat, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan was credited with 12 confirmed enemy kills, 4 probables, and 3 damaged. The news spread through the 8th Air Force like wildfire. By the next evening, representatives from Fosswood Bomber Command Headquarters had arrived at Framlingham. Major General Frederick Anderson, the commanding officer of the entire command, arrived personally. He found Donovan in the enlisted men's barracks, methodically cleaning his .50 caliber machine guns. "At ease, Sergeant," Anderson said, his presence filling the small room. "I'm here to understand what you did up there yesterday." Donovan explained his philosophy, his voice straightforward and unadorned. He spoke of aggressive fire, of psychological intimidation, of seizing the initiative and attacking the enemy during their vulnerable formation phase. Anderson, a pioneer of strategic bombing himself, listened intently. When Donovan finished, the general asked a single crucial question. "Can you teach this to other men?" "Not everyone's got the temperament for it, sir," Donovan admitted. "You need gunners who think like street fighters, not like soldiers in a fortress. You need men who see opportunity instead of just threat. Men who'd rather attack than defend." "Find them," Anderson ordered. "I'm authorizing a new training program, effective immediately. You will develop the curriculum. You will select the candidates. You are going to transform tail gunner tactics across the entire 8th Air Force." Donovan hesitated. "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to stay with my crew." "Your crew doesn't need you anymore, Sergeant," Anderson said bluntly. "They're alive because of what you did. Hundreds of other crews are dying because their gunners don't know what you know. Which is more important? 9 men or 9,000? The answer was obvious. Donovan accepted the assignment. He spent the next month developing what would become officially known as the Aggressive Gunnery Program, but what everyone in the 8th Air Force would call the Donovan Doctrine. Its core principles were simple but revolutionary. 1. Seize the initiative. Never wait for the enemy to attack. Engage them during their formation phase to disrupt their coordination. 2. Psychological warfare. The first burst is not to kill, but to intimidate. Make the enemy hesitant and force them to second-guess their attack. 3. Focus fire. When outnumbered, do not divide attention. Concentrate all firepower on the most immediate and dangerous threat sector. 4. Ammunition economy. Through aggression. A few rounds that scatter a formation are more efficient than hundreds of rounds fired at determined, individual attackers. 5. Accept risk. Aggressive tactics may increase individual exposure, but they dramatically decrease overall mission losses. The mission is more important than the man. The doctrine faced immediate resistance. Old-school gunnery instructors called it reckless suicide. Command officers worried about the massive expenditure of ammunition. But the numbers didn't lie. In the 3 months before the implementation of Donovan's program, the tailgunner casualty rate in the 8th Air Force was 38%. In the 3 months after its widespread adoption, that rate dropped to 23%. German fighters, who had previously completed over half of their planned attack runs, saw their success rate plummet to just 27%. The psychological impact was even greater. German fighter pilots, communicating over the radio, began to warn each other away from specific American bomber groups known to employ aggressive gunners. The reputation of men trained by Donovan became a shield, a deterrent that saved countless lives. Captured Luftwaffe after-action reports from the summer of 1944 specifically mentioned the new American tactics, recommending that pilots avoid direct stern approaches altogether. The hunters had become the hunted. Donovan personally trained over 300 tailgunners between March and August of 1944. His graduates became legends in their own right, accounting for a disproportionate number of enemy kills. Conservative post-war estimates credited the Donovan Doctrine with saving over 300 American bombers and the lives of the 3,000 airmen aboard them. Michael Donovan never flew another combat mission. He spent the rest of the war on the ground, teaching other young men how to fight and survive in the brutal skies over Europe. When the war ended, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. He returned to South Boston, traded his flight jacket for a tool belt, and went to work in construction. He married, raised 3 children, and never once spoke about what he had done. When journalists, writing retrospective pieces on the air war in the 1960s, tracked him down, he politely declined to be interviewed. "I just did what needed doing," was all he would say. So did 300 other gunners. They're the real story. One of those gunners, a man named Thomas Bailey, who had scored 16 kills in his first 4 missions after completing Donovan's course, disagreed. In a 1972 interview, he tried to explain Donovan's true impact. "Before Mike, we thought survival meant hiding, making ourselves small, conserving everything. Mike taught us that true survival means making the other guy more scared of you than you are of him." It sounds simple, but it changed everything. Michael Donovan died of a heart attack in 1998 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Boston Globe was brief. It mentioned his military service in a single paragraph. He was a decorated tail gunner with the 8th Air Force in World War II and developed new defensive tactics for bomber crews. The paragraph didn't mention the 12 kills in 4 minutes. It didn't mention the 300 gunners he trained. It didn't mention the 3,000 lives he saved. His funeral was a small, quiet affair at St. Augustine Cemetery. Only 17 people attended, mostly family and a few old friends from the neighborhood. There was no military honor guard, no 21-gun salute. The priest who performed the service didn't know he was burying a man who had single-handedly altered the course of aerial warfare. But the other tailgunners knew. The night before the funeral, the surviving graduates of the aggressive gunnery program, now old men with fading memories and thinning hair, gathered at a VFW hall in South Boston. They raised their glasses and told stories, their voices thick with emotion, remembering the tough, quiet man who had taught them how to fight back. Thomas Bailey, then 74 years old, gave the final toast. "Mike Donovan never thought he was a hero," he said, his voice cracking. "He just thought he was a guy doing his job. But his job saved thousands of us. Every bomber that made it home because German fighters broke off their attack, every gunner who survived his tour because he learned to be the aggressor, every mission that succeeded because the enemy was too scared to engage. That's Mike's legacy, not 12 kills, thousands of lives." The Donovan Doctrine remains a core tenet in modern aerial combat training. The principle of seizing the initiative, of psychological intimidation, of proactive defense, is taught to fighter pilots and drone operators alike. The echoes of that 4-minute battle on March 6, 1944, still reverberate in the war rooms of the 21st century. It was the moment when defense became offense, when reaction became action, when one street fighter from South Boston, kneeling in a cold, cramped turret 4 miles above the earth, proved that survival doesn't come from waiting for death to find you. It comes from going out and hunting it first.